Well, thank you so much. Now, I don't know if this is on yet. Can you guys hear me, though? I have a very loud voice. Yeah. You're good? Okay. All right. Well, oh, and thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you, Steve. Is that you? Or is it, I don't know if he's here yet. For inviting me, and for Mary Angela for showing me around just now. And I'm really excited to be speaking to 3 different departments, and hopefully what I say will make some sense. I'm trying to keep it as interdisciplinary as possible, while also throwing a lot of what I hope is substance in. So what I'm going to talk about today is a conception of the mind which I see all over the place and which is driving me crazy, the software model of the mind. So let me go ahead and give you a little background. So George was very kind in such a nice introduction, and as he mentioned, I did a book on the computational paradigm in cognitive science, defending a very particular approach to the brain. I defended a view in which the cognitive mind is a sort of symbol processing engine that's implemented by neural networks, much like the multi-layered nets that are now being detailed by people working in deep learning, in machine learning. So that's my background, and I began to dig a little deeper after that book, though, because I'm also a metaphysician, and metaphysicians study the fundamental nature of reality. It's a subfield of philosophy, and basically in that field, I saw that the language of thought was obviously not a book in metaphysics, but even if computationalism about the brain was correct, that issue still leaves open a host of other issues about the fundamental nature of the mind. So for instance, it could turn out that even if everyone agreed on a certain computational approach to the brain within the field of cognitive science, substance dualism could be correct. That is, we could in fact survive the death of the brain. So this is to say that science alone cannot explain fully the fundamental nature of the mind. That happens in dialogue with the humanities. So I think there could be other philosophical positions that suggest that the mind is not the brain as well. The mind could be extended, as in the work of Andy Clark and George here, who's been working on the extended mind. Or it could be the software that the brain runs, as Ned Block has advocated, and many cognitive scientists advocate as well. So the brain's being computational does not really entail a certain position about the fundamental nature of the mind. So computationalism, even if correct about the brain, is only the beginning of the philosophical story about the nature of the mind. So let us ask, what is the nature of the mind then? Well, today, what I'm going to do is consider a leading approach to the mind in cognitive science, philosophy, and popular culture. This is the view that the mind is the software running on the brain. And we'll learn about its flaws in the context of debates on brain uploading, the idea that you could transfer your consciousness in order to avoid death to a computer. There's been a lot of talk about brain uploading. I will then discuss a related patternist theory of the self, or in the field of metaphysics, a theory of personal identity. That's what metaphysicians call it. And I'm going to argue that's in bad shape too. I'll close by discussing machine consciousness because it's related, and I think it's a very interesting topic that I would like to raise for the computer scientists in the room. I think it'd be fun. I'm giving a TED Talk on it in a month, so it's on my mind. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the software model in a little bit more detail. So this dominant view in philosophy of mind and cognitive science is this software view. And you'll see here in red text, I've isolated what I think the gist of the view is. The gist is that it holds that the mind is the program running on the brain. That is the algorithm that the brain implements, something in principle discoverable by cognitive science. Now, Nick Bostrom, who runs the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, and Ray Kurzweil, who's now a director of engineering at Google, both hold this view. And they are what philosophers call connectionists. They work within the neural network-based approach. And they adopt a version of the software model of the mind, which they simply call informational patternism. Okay? And so you'll hear me talk today about patternism when I look at theories of the nature of the self. As we'll see, transhumanists tend to see patternism as a theory of personal identity as well as a theory of the mind's nature. And I'll be talking about transhumanism shortly, but essentially transhumanists are very futuristic technophiles who are becoming very mainstream, and they're quite influential in the science media, and they have this view that we can upload the mind to avoid death, and they have a very progressive approach toward the use of technology, and I'll be talking about some philosophical problems with their position shortly. But first, a friendly amendment to the software model of the mind. Proponents of this view uphold what philosophers call multiple realizability. That is, they hold the view that thinking can be realized by both a silicon and carbon-based substrate, and possibly other substrates as well. And maybe that is right. So what I want to do is I want to amend what they said earlier. Because if you look here, they're talking about the mind being the program running on the brain. But they're saying that thinking can be realized by silicon. So we need to fix this for them. And I think there's a way to do that. They really mean the mind is a program that runs on physical hardware. That's what they tend to mean, whether it be silicon or carbon. It need not be biological, and maybe we wouldn't call it a brain. So we really need to ask whether this amended software model is even plausible. So in the interest of being charitable, I'm going to look at that question. Okay. So let's consider whether this amended view is even plausible by looking at the case of uploading, which these transhumanists like Nick Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil have been recently advocating.
Quick clarification question. And if it confuses more than clarifies, please don't answer. But is the view that you're putting here akin to a functionalist view, where you basically what you have is the mind, the property of the relations among the items? Is this functionalism by another word label, or is this something else?
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to talk about functionalism, but basically that multiple realizability doctrine is a doctrine held by functionalists. That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah. But people who don't know about functionalism, we're not going to go into that today, and you don't need to know about functionalism.
I'm sorry, I'll ask you the question, but I promise I'll try to keep it.
That's cool. Okay.
I try.
Yeah.
So, as a cognitive neuroscientist, I have a stroke in the left frontal lobe, and I can still see, but I can't talk anymore. I have a stroke in the occipital cortex. Now I cannot see, but I can talk perfectly fine. Is that something orthogonal or independent to the claims that you're making in the mind as the software of the brain?
Here's how it relates. Okay. Each person's mind on this view is described by a sort of Uber algorithm. And it could be very unique. It could be detailed to individual people. And you would have a change in your mental algorithm, right? If you had a stroke, a certain part of your brain would be, disabled. And that would change the ultimate description of how your brain worked that theoretically, in principle, cognitive science would deliver up. Okay? And I look at that from the level of each little part of the brain. There's a sort of program that is described. So, beginning with, say, area CA1 of the hippocampus, moving up to the whole hippocampus, there's a program that describes that, going up to the whole level of the brain. Okay? So now let me talk about uploading. So I don't know if any of you saw Transcendence. the Johnny Depp film. I'm a sci-fi buff, so yeah. So that was, I don't know. Did you guys like it? The people who saw it. So yeah, it wasn't great, but I'm so convinced that the mad scientist was supposed to be Ray Kurzweil. So, you know, that was depicting brain uploading, but let me say a little bit more about it. So I've mentioned that what it is it's a sort of means of transferring your consciousness and all the contents of your memory, every behavioral disposition, and so on, onto a computer, and then ideally downloading it into another body, or at least an Android body, okay? And this has been discussed in, for instance, Robert Sawyer's wonderful science fiction novel, Mind Scan, as well as the Johnny Depp movie. Now, Stephen Hawking has recently talked about it. He says, quote, "I think the brain is like a program, so it's theoretically possible to copy the brain onto a computer and provide a form of life after death." And Nick Bostrom, in this lengthy passage, outlines what these transhumanists have in mind in a transhumanist document that has been regarded as being very important to transhumanist theory. So Bostrom writes, "Uploading is the process of transferring an intellect from a biological brain to a computer. One way of doing this might be by first scanning the synaptic structure of a brain and implementing the same computations in an electronic medium. Advantages of being an upload would include uploads would not be subject to biological aging. Backup copies of uploads could be created regularly so that you could be rebooted if something happens." This is great. You could finally climb Everest. Not worry about it, right? Or skydive. This sounds really fun. Okay. And he says, "Your lifespan could potentially be as long as the universe is. Radical cognitive enhancements would likely be easier to implement in an upload than in an organic brain." So you could enhance your brain while you were uploaded. And then he writes, "A widely accepted position is that you survive so long as certain information patterns are conserved, such as your memories, values, attitudes, and emotional dispositions. For the continuation of personhood, on this view, it matters little whether you are implemented on a silicon chip inside of a computer or in that gray, cheesy lump inside your skull, assuming that both implementations are conscious." Okay, so you can see why this excites people. Now, uploading is at early stages of development. Let me just mention the Open Worm project. If you have kids, you can actually download an uploaded worm onto a Lego robot and watch it act like a worm in your house. Okay, and Nick Bostrom and some others at the Future of Humanity Institute authored the Brain Emulation Handbook. They even gave a talk while I was at Penn to the Penn neuroscientists, talking about how they would slice up parts of the brain and upload it. So it is under development. Would you sign up? That's what I want to ask. So would you upload? Here's a scenario. So you've been training for space flight for years. And finally, after years of training, NASA calls you into a boardroom and you're with a bunch of super influential people, and they sit you down and they say, "All right, we have a mission. We're going to send you to Europa." Okay? And you say to them, "But I could never get to Europa. It would take so long, and how could we do this? And you know, this is beyond our current technological capacity," and so on. But they say that the technology has actually been perfected. They're going to upload you instead, okay? But the uploading is destructive. So destructive uploading is what we think the earliest form of uploading would be, and that would be a case when your brain is diced up and the neural connections are carefully measured, and you know, every detail about your brain is copied onto the computer. At least we hope every detail, right? But you know, early uploading, let's just say, I mean, I wouldn't want to be an early upload, okay? And it is under development. I was called by a New York Times reporter. The story actually ended up making the front page about a girl who cryogenically froze her brain. She died. She signed up, and she did successfully have her brain cryogenically frozen. And the plan, because of the details of her case, the way the brain was frozen, is to upload her eventually, not to revive her cryogenically. So this I talk about this in bioethics classes as the most unbelievably futuristic bioethics example out there. But her name is Kim Souzzi. It's Souzzi. She was a neuroscience undergraduate, found out she had a brain tumor, and decided that when she went, because it was very serious, that she would cryogenically freeze herself. And now the people who are the custodians of her brain are planning eventually to upload her. So this is actually very serious. So let's ask, would you survive? Would you really survive? Well, even assuming the technology is precise, capturing every detail of your mental life, there are reasons to believe that the upload wouldn't really be you. And I'm sorry for that in light of this young lady. I lost a little bit of sleep after that interview. I was so upset about her story. But yourself or mind would have to transfer to a new location outside of your brain. And physical objects, last time I checked, at least mid-size, ordinary physical objects, do not normally jump across space-time to new locations. They follow a continuous path through space over time, okay? So I'm skeptical. For us to be an exception to this rule would be metaphysical luck. So why would we expect that we would be able to do this when all the objects that we normally interact with don't act like that? They don't just move, get sliced up, and then all of a sudden jump somewhere else and get downloaded somewhere else. It's too strange for us to think that it would constitute the survival of the same object over time. Furthermore, here's a case which I think is colorful and suggestive. Consider an uploading scenario in which your brain survives the scan, as may in fact be the case with more sophisticated uploading techniques. So suppose that brain imaging gets really, really good 100 or 200 years into the future, and now they can actually measure your neural connections and all the interesting features of your brain with such precision that they could upload you without slicing your brain up. So you could survive the scan. So suppose you do. Well, suppose your upload is then downloaded into an android body, and that person looks just like you. So suppose that android development got really good. You know that for those of you who've seen the Japanese androids, it's pretty scary already. Now 200 years into the future, it's unbelievable. The person looks just like you. So suppose that you decide to meet your upload in a bar for a drink. And as you have a beer with your android double, the two of you reflect on who is truly the original, who is truly you. Your upload could argue convincingly that it's you, for it has all the same memories you do, and even remembers the beginning of the surgical procedure in which you were scanned. But is it really plausible that the upload is you? You're sitting right next to it in the bar. So then why think that you really uploaded in the case of destructive uploading, right? Yeah, so I think that kind of kills it, or it should kill it. But here's another objection, then I'll go to their response. I want to ask, could you really be in many places at once? Furthermore, to continue my little mini rant against uploading, you could be downloaded, in principle, if you were uploaded, to multiple locations at once, like Smith in The Matrix. You could be all over the place. You could get a lot of work done. It'd be great, right? Someone else can give your child a ride somewhere. You could actually get some work done. It'd be great. So in that case, you would be multiply located. Ordinary physical objects don't work that way, however. So my coffee cup is here. It is not simultaneously somewhere in Brazil. A physical object can be located in different places at different times, but not at the same time, at least not macroscopic physical objects, okay? We seem to be physical objects of a very special sort, at least during our earthly lives. We are living beings. For us to be an exception to the general pattern of behavior of macroscopic spatiotemporal objects would be stupendous metaphysical luck. Okay, so in sum, I don't think you can be an upload. Here's another way to distinguish or to put the issue. We can distinguish between two questions. If your brain is scanned and uploaded, would that upload be the same person as the original, or would it merely be a replica? That is, would uploading be a form of survival? And I think the answer to that is no. But a second issue is if someone's brain is scanned and uploaded, would the upload be a conscious being? Now, I actually think that's a separate question. And that's where we get to machine consciousness. And I haven't said anything about that. I actually believe then the answer to the first question is no, but the second is currently an open question. And if time allows, I might say a little bit about that. If I'm right about what I've said so far, even if you think the brain's computational, you really shouldn't upload, at least if your primary motivation is survival. So if you were called in by NASA and you were completely altruistic, you wanted Europa research to happen and you thought you'd be the only one who would volunteer, that's different. Maybe you should upload in that case. But if you're doing it on the assumption that you're going to come back and be a hero and enjoy your life, you really shouldn't do it. Okay. And further, there will be no uploads who were once human beings. As I said, and I wrote a piece for the New York Times ranting about this because there's just so much research on this now. Uploads would be, at most, if they were capable of being conscious, if they were selves or persons, digital descendants of us, but they wouldn't be us. They would be our mind children, if you will. Okay, let me check the time. All right, now, do you want to hear a little bit about machine consciousness and then go back to the software model? Or do you want me to press on with software? What?
We don't know.
You don't.
We come back to this after software model later on.
Well, okay, I'll just say, honestly, to speak to that question about machine consciousness, I'm now very skeptical. So I just wanted to bring that up because if you're interested in this issue, I've just wrote an op-ed in the Huffington Post called "The Problem of AI Consciousness," and what I said was, look, the problem's not the same as the hard problem, by the way, for philosophers. It's a different problem. It's a problem of would the processing of a silicon-based, super intelligent, or even artificial general intelligence system feel a certain way from the inside? So the question here is, look, there's a lot of talk right now of the possibility of artificial general intelligence. And I don't think it's a laughing matter. I mean, with the interesting innovations that you've seen with Google DeepMind, for example, there could, within the next 20, 30, 40 years be AGIs or artificial general intelligences out there. They may not look anything like us, or they may actually be reverse engineered from us. It's hard to get it right, the reverse engineering. It'll probably be something for business interests, but it could very well look like an AGI. It just won't look like a human. It won't think like a human. But we have to ask whether it's conscious, because something that's conscious deserves rights, if you believe in rights. If you don't believe in rights, it at least needs consideration in the utilitarian calculus. It needs to be treated with dignity and respect, even if it's not, Homo sapien. And I think Peter Singer's work is important on speciesism in the context of animal liberation. So I think this is important to think about, would it feel a certain way to be an AGI, or even a superintelligence, an intelligence which is vastly smarter than humans in every way. Well, I think AI could pose a problem about us, by the way. It could ask whether something that's made up like us could really feel a certain way from the inside. How could it ever be certain we're conscious?
Could you explain what you mean by from the inside?
Oh, yeah, okay. So when you think of the visual experience of seeing a wonderful sunset or the taste of drinking your favorite wine, okay, as you sit, in Italy somewhere. Okay, yeah, got good imagery going. So that experience you're having is had from the inside. It's unique to you. There's something it feels like to be you. And now there's something it feels like to be you. And notice that all of the experience piping from distinct senses is bound together into a sort of unified whole, at least for a moment. And that is what it is to be you. That's what it is to be conscious, to have conscious experience. And so what I'm asking is whether it will feel a certain way to be an AGI or a superintelligence. Now, I used to think the problem had a very easy solution. Cognitive science holds that the brain is an information processing system and all mental functions are computations. Given this, it would seem that AGIs can be conscious, for AIs have the same kind of minds we do, computational ones. That would seem to be weakly supported, at least, by cognitive science. Just as a text message and a voice message convey the same information, so too brains and a sophisticated AI could in principle be conscious. Now I think it's an open question. For one thing, a superintelligence could bypass consciousness altogether. In humans, consciousness is correlated with novel learning tasks that require concentration. And when a thought is under the spotlight of attention, it is processed in a slow, laborious, sequential manner. Only a very small percentage of our mental processing is actually conscious at any given time. So wouldn't a super intelligent machine or even, a lower grade AGI bypass that completely because it had expert level knowledge in every domain with rapid fire computations ranging over vast databases that could even encompass the entire internet? So I'm not so sure. It may not need the mental faculties that humans have that allow humans to be conscious. Further, consciousness could be limited to carbon substrates that are like us. So carbon molecules form stronger, more stable chemical bonds than silicon, and that allows carbon to form an extraordinary number of compounds. And unlike silicon, carbon has the capacity to more easily form double bonds. This is something I learned doing work in astrobiology with NASA this year at CTI in Princeton. If these chemical differences between carbon and silicon, which are commonly discussed in astrobiology, impact the origin of life itself, we shouldn't rule out the possibility that these chemical differences also impact whether silicon gives rise to consciousness. Okay, so as a result, to go back to the uploading case, it doesn't seem like it would really be you. It would just be a computational copy that wouldn't even be conscious if the answer to the question about AI consciousness is negative. Okay? So I just wanted to raise that issue quickly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise a response to what I've said thus far about uploading by the proponents of the software model to the mind. Okay, so I'm going back now to my critique of uploading, and the software model of the mind would basically suggest this kind of response. Uploading the mind is like uploading software, they would say. You can upload software and download it to a new location. Software could even be downloaded to multiple locations at once, right? So perhaps we're not like ordinary physical objects, the way I've been assuming. Perhaps our minds are instead programs. When a person's brain is scanned under ideal conditions, the scanning process copies the person's neural configuration or their program or informational pattern. One can survive uploading insofar as one's pattern survives. Okay, so these responses were in Wired Magazine, Big Think, Humanity Plus, to my view. So I feel like I should finally respond to what they say, because I think they're raising a very important point, which is really, this view, I think, is part of popular technological culture. I see this all over the science media. Okay, so for the rest of today, for the few minutes that I have, I want to dismantle this response and the related software model of the mind. So what is a program? Let's start there. If the mind is a software program or pattern of information, then it's an abstract entity. In the field of philosophy of mathematics, they study the nature of abstract entities like equations, sets, programs, numbers. They are said to be non-concrete. They're not like a concrete physical object. They're non-spatial. They're not in space. They're not in time. And they're not causal. An equation isn't located anywhere. You could write it down somewhere, but that's not the equation. That's the inscription. Okay? An equation is abstract. It's not a concrete object. It doesn't cause something to happen, nor does a program. It's only the program instantiation which causes things to happen and which is concrete. And this is an important distinction. We are not equations. We are not numbers. We are not programs. Minds think and they cause things to happen in the world. Okay? Minds are causal. They act on things in space-time. So you're thinking that you want to make coffee causes you to move your arm to try to put the coffee into the cup. And minds are spatiotemporal entities. Further, we can tell we're not abstract like numbers. Not only do we cause things to happen, but moments pass for us. Time passes. We are in time. You can introspect a sequence of thoughts running through your head right this minute, for example. So you can see that you're a temporal object. Now, let me move to an important reply to this, because I think the proponent of the software model at this point can simply amend her view and offer what I call the instantiation reply. So on this view, you might think that there's a way to save the software model, although it doesn't suggest that we could survive uploading. So what if the proponent of the software model of the mind held that the mind is not the program, but it's the instantiation of the program? Instantiations are concrete spatial things like computers and brains. We could see those as instantiations of programs, right? At least at a certain time. And those are not abstract entities. So would saying this provide a better approach to the nature of the self or the nature of the mind? Well, I think it just begs the question. What is it to be an entity that runs a program or has the pattern? What is it to be a program instantiation? Virtually any position on the nature of the self or mind seems to be game here. So the debate just rages on, and the position doesn't really do anything. And it doesn't support the view that you could upload, so it doesn't even help the people who uphold uploading, because a program instantiation is concrete. It's not something which is multiply located the way that something abstract like software or an equation is located everywhere or wherever it's supposed to be downloaded. So physicalism, for example, is compatible with this. This view holds that everything is physical or material. The instantiation view does not entail it, but it also doesn't rule it out. It's also compatible with the view that we have immaterial minds, that we're not physical beings at all, and that we have souls. The instantiation view says nothing about that. So again, it's not informative. It's even compatible with idealism. Everything could be mental. So I don't really think it's saying anything. I think, it's not really a position on the nature of the mind. So to change the software position on the nature of mind to an instantiation view isn't to say very much. It is to say something which I think is at the beginning of the philosophical day, which is, wow, it's really interesting that the mind can be detailed algorithmically. What follows after that metaphysically? What's the metaphysical story about the fundamental nature of the mind? And I'm writing a book on this called The Mind-Body Problem, and I think the answer there is to do very detailed work in the field of metaphysics about the nature of objects, or substances, as we say in metaphysics, the nature of properties, the nature of laws of nature, a whole host of other issues. You can't just go from what cognitive science says to a position about the nature of the self. These are important points and debates to have, but the point is that saying that we are that which runs a program is actually fairly uninformative, I'm afraid. Okay, now I'm going to skip this slide, but I'm just going to say that the work I do in metaphysics is sort of answering the next response that the proponent of this view would make, which would be to offer physicalist theories that say that we are material beings. And they would try to combine this position that we're software with the view that we are material beings of a special sort. And my recent work has answered some of their points because there's a broader issue here about whether we are material beings, which I think is very important. So, in sum, I think it's important to distinguish scientific progress on detailing the computational structure of the brain from understanding the essence of the self, person, or mind as being a program. While the former view is substantiated with a good deal of research and is largely an empirical matter, that is the view that cognitive science says the brain is detailed algorithmically, the latter view, the view that the mind is a program, is a philosophical position that does not follow from science. Minds are not software when you think about it. And the view that the mind is an instantiation of software, well, who knows, maybe it's right. It's just not really an informative position about the nature of the mind. The transhumanists have a reaction to this. I don't know, though, if I have time to go into that. I don't know, where are we at? Do I have like 5 more minutes? Or? Yeah. Okay, cool. I hate speaking longer. Okay, because people get tired. So transhumanism, I've mentioned this view, and the transhumanists basically, these are, as I mentioned, they're techno-progressives, and now transhumanism has become a sort of cultural movement with the eventual goal of transforming the human condition by developing and making widely available technologies to greatly enhance human capacities. And their reaction to all of this could be that there seems to be something right to this patternist view, this informational patternism that I talked about earlier, as an approach to personal identity. So that suggests that I'm mistaken that it's an impoverished view of the mind, because the idea that we persist over time because we're a continuing pattern of information seems to be a good one. So something might be right about the view. So what about that? Well, the transhumanists have this trajectory for self-improvement. They think we should go from being 21st century unenhanced humans to having significant upgrading with cognitive, perceptual, and other physical enhancements. So maybe it starts with a mobile internet connection or some sort of a brain chip to save us from death. You know, say you have, you know, some tumor or something, you need part of your brain replaced that you couldn't live without. And then from there, you just keep replacing with more and more technology until all of a sudden you are an artificial intelligence. You are a silicon-based being, or maybe you're made of carbon nanotubes, or, you know, they're talking about other types of substrates like graphene and all kinds of interesting things that Kurzweil's assistant just emailed me about. You know, but then at that point, you're post-human. And if you get really smart through all those cognitive enhancements, maybe one day you could become a super intelligent being. Time magazine recently had a cover story about this. They say 2045, the year that humans become immortal. Yeah, what about accidents, right? Immortal. Well, would you embark upon this journey? I mean, it's harder when it's gradual, right? It's like, oh no, you know, I just lost my hippocampus. I can't encode any new information. Well, I guess I don't even know if you could reflect about what to do in that case, but you know, would you get, you know, an artificial hippocampus? I would. Why not? So when do you stop, right? I mean, at what point do you say enough is enough? Here, I think there are deep philosophical questions that have no easy answers. For in order to understand whether you should enhance, you need to first understand what you are to begin with. But what is a person? What is a self? And given your conception of a person, after such radical changes, would you continue to exist, or would you have ceased to exist, having been replaced by somebody else? Or, by the way, if the question to the problem of AI consciousness is negative, then you'd be replacing and you'd be saying, uh-oh, I think I just lost like visual consciousness or something. Like consciousness would start to diminish or go away. Well, if the latter, would you want to embark on the path to radical enhancement? Okay, so if you fear that you would really be ceasing to exist with these gradual enhancements, or that your consciousness would be diminished, would you want to embark on the path to radical enhancement? Well, for enhancement to be a worthwhile option, it has to represent a form of your personal development. And at bare minimum, even if the enhancement brings such goodies as superhuman intelligence and radical life extension, it can't involve the elimination of any features that are essential to you. That is, something which you believe is necessary for your existence to continue, such as your consciousness. So consider Kurzweil's observation that from moment to moment, the particles in your body are changing. And it's possible that as you read this or hear this, you have few of the same particles in your body that you've had when you were born or even 7 years ago. You've survived, you think. You're sitting here, so you know you must have survived. So it must be related to the survival of your pattern. Now, is that even plausible? Well, in light of my earlier discussion, we know we aren't just a pattern, because that's abstract. We're not abstract like an equation or program. But amended patternism is still on the table. Maybe you are a continuous spatio-temporal pattern of information that persists over time. Now that rules out uploading because the continuity wouldn't be there in the case of uploading, but it may be a good view of the nature of the self nevertheless. And that's what the transhumanist thinks, and that's their current response that we're looking at. And other forms of brain enhancement, even silicon-based brain enhancements, could be compatible with your survival. You know, bearing in mind that machine consciousness is an open question. I mean, you might choose to gradually replace parts of your brain with silicon chips slowly. Okay, well, in my work, I argue that amended patternism is actually a bad idea. So the patternist view is, well, it's not something which is actually workable. Now, I don't know if I have time, so what I'll do is I'll basically just quickly summarize and then end here. So the extreme cases are clear when you think about this view. You know that amended patternists have to rule out uploading because you don't have spatiotemporal continuity. But the middle range enhancements are difficult, actually. I mean, if you're a pattern, what does that mean? Under what conditions does your pattern survive? You know, I mean, I don't know if any of you saw Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. But, you know, in that case, Jim Carrey had his memories of a relationship erased. Now, is that something which is compatible with the survival of a pattern, a person's pattern, taking all your memories of a relationship out of your brain? If you might say yes to that, well, what about if we erase someone's entire childhood? Would that be compatible with patternism? Where do we draw the line? And how do we have a reasonable position on this matter? Because we're talking about brain enhancements or brain therapies. These are decisions which people may have to make going into the future. So we need sensible thing to say to people who may be making life or death decisions. If they're patternists, they have problems. That's my point. So in sum, what I did at the beginning of the talk is isolate a very specific position that's very popular in the field of cognitive science and also in the field of philosophy of mind and within technoculture. That is the view that the mind is the software of the brain, okay? Now, I noted that the view really shouldn't be specific to brains because a lot of the proponents of this position think that minds don't need to be brains. They could be programs that are implemented by something else, something that's carbon-based. But that didn't matter because I looked at the general position. So I amended the view and I looked at the general position. And then what I did was I used an example to show what I think is an underlying flaw in the position. This position loves uploading, especially the transhumanists. So they talk a lot about how our software could survive the death of our bodies because we could upload our software and download it somewhere else at will. And that could be a means to avoid death. So, you know, it could be very exciting for people. Unfortunately, I've argued that that position isn't sensible because ordinary physical objects don't survive being taken apart with their information sent to what could be a vastly remote location very far away, even to say Europa, and then have something that's reassembled with the same informational configuration. I mean, that's basically creating a copy of something else. I recently heard that NASA was able to 3D print a wrench on a spaceship that needed a wrench. So they sent the program over and the astronaut was able to assemble a wrench. Now that is not the same wrench. That's all I'm saying. Okay, it's a simple point. But the proponents of the software model retorted that no, I have not embraced the view wholeheartedly that we are really like software that could be instantiated in multiple locations at once. Okay, and then I say to that, well, no, you're making a mistake. You're thinking that we are abstract objects like programs. Programs, you know, you can download a program somewhere else, but that downloaded copy is not the same as you. You are still, at best, a software instantiation. But what is that anyway, to say that something is a software instantiation? Well, to that I said, it's not really a position that's very informative when you look at it metaphysically because it's compatible with a whole host of other views. Okay, so there's a lot to pack in a talk, but I do have this all written down in the form of an article which is very accessible at my website, which has the same name as this talk. So I'll conclude now and just thank you very much for your time.
We have time for a few questions.
Okay.
I know that some students have classes now, so if
Okay. Oh,
somebody
no
needs to
problem.
leave,
Yeah.
let's just give them a moment.